On a 40-degree afternoon in Kanchanaburi, 4 years after I left the States, I stepped out for my first real Songkran, expecting a water fight to survive, and the whole street went quiet and turned to look at me instead. Before I tell you what she did next, do me one small favor. Subscribe to the channel and tap that little bell so the next porch story finds you and doesn't slip past. It honestly makes my day over here. And if you've ever wondered whether a retiree can really stop being an outsider over here, stay with me. This is the afternoon that answered it for me. Let me take you back to that morning. I'm Otis, 66, 4 years now on the River Kwai, and I'd woken up already dreading the day. Songkran, Thai New Year. In my head, it was one thing, a soaking to endure. Teenagers with pressure hoses on the back of a pickup. A wall of strangers I'd only ever nodded to, all of them armed, all of them aiming at the new farang. So I did what a nervous man does. I walked down to the market before the heat got mean and bought myself a cheap little water gun, 20 baht. Bright plastic, the kind that leaks at the handle. I carried it home like a prop for a play. I didn't plan to be in something to hold, so I wouldn't stand there empty-handed. Because here's the honest part. This was not my first Songkran. It was my first real one. 3 previous Songkrans I'd hidden. Gate shut, latch down, my porch chair pulled into the one strip of shade, a cold drink sweating in my hand while the street went wild without me. I told myself it was the traffic. I'd read all the warnings, the wet roads, the pickups, the folks who'd had one too many, and some of that is true. I won't pretty it up for you, but mostly I hid from the heat and from not knowing the rules. And that heat is real. Let me give you something checkable before we go on, because this is the part nobody puts on a brochure. April in Kanchanaburi runs close to 40 degrees. That's the kind of heat that wrings you out by noon. Leaves your shirt stuck to your back before you've done a single thing. And Songkran, in a small town like this one, it is nothing like the tourist crush you've seen on the TV. Those Bangkok streets packed shoulder to shoulder. Out here, it's quieter, slower, more neighborly. Which, it turns out, is exactly the part that catches a newcomer off guard. And that's the thing, 4 years here taught me the stuff that actually decides whether you make it isn't on any visa form. It's the small customs. What you do when a neighbor walks up and pours water on your shoulder. Which is exactly why I sat down and wrote it all out in One Way Guide, the practical ebook inside the One Way Club. It answers the everyday questions a visa officer never will for folks seriously planning this move, not somebody after a 2-week holiday checklist. The link's in the description if that's you. So, that afternoon, water gun in hand, I finally did the thing I'd dodged 3 years running. I unlatched my gate. Picture it with me for a second, 66 years old. A plastic water gun in your hand, and a street full of people you've only ever nodded to. My thumb was already on the trigger. My shoulders were up around my ears, braced for the first cold blast to catch me right between the eyes. And it didn't come. I stepped out onto Songkran Road expecting a roar. Kids screaming, water arcing everywhere, pure chaos. Instead, the street went still. Heads turned, slow, one after another, all the way down the road toward the man standing at his own gate. The new farang with his silly 20 baht gun, not a drop on him yet. Nobody fired. Down the way, under a faded green umbrella that's shaded her noodle stall for as long as I've lived on that road, a woman named Malie looked up from her pot. I knew her face the way you know everyone's face after 4 years. A nod in the morning, a bowl of noodles now and then, never much more than that. She set down her ladle, and she started walking toward me. Not fast, not with a bucket, not with a hose. She was carrying something small, cradled in both hands, and it caught the sun as she came silver, round, no bigger than a cereal bowl. The whole street had gone quiet and turned to look, and Malie was walking straight at me with this little silver bowl held in both hands. And I stood there, 66 years old, dripping sweat in the 40-degree heat, gripping a water gun I suddenly had no idea what to do with, and no idea at all what she was about to do with that bowl. And here's what she did with it. She stopped right in front of me, that little silver bowl cupped in both hands, small enough to hold in your palms. The water inside smelled of jasmine. I caught it a second before I understood any of it. She didn't wind up. She didn't grin and let me have it. She dipped 2 fingers in, lifted them, and poured a slow, cool trickle down over my shoulder. And she said something soft under her breath. A blessing for the new year, the kind of words you don't need translated to feel. That was it. That was the thing I'd gotten wrong for 3 years straight. Because Songkran, in a quiet town like Kanchanaburi, doesn't start as a water fight. It starts as this. Water poured gently over your shoulder, over your hands, by someone standing close and wishing you well for the year ahead. Out on the big city streets, they turn it into pressure hoses and pickup trucks packed with ice water. And sure, that happens. That's real too. But that's the loud outer layer. Underneath it is this small silver bowl, 2 fingers, and 1 quiet word. And I'd missed it completely. 3 Aprils in a row, I sat behind my gate bracing for teenagers with hoses. And I never once walked out far enough to see that the whole thing begins as a blessing. And I'll be straight with you, this is the part I never tell first. The heat that day was no joke. April in Kanchanaburi is brutal. I'm talking close to 40 degrees, the kind of heat that settles on you by mid-morning and has you wrung out by noon. That's the real reason I'd hidden all those years. Not the water, the heat. I used to tell myself it was the wet roads and the traffic, but honestly, I just didn't want to stand out in 40 degrees and sweat through my shirt in front of the whole neighborhood. So I'd stayed inside with the fan going and let the best day of the year happen without me, 3 times. And then the block loosened. It's hard to explain how fast it went. Malie poured her little blessing, and it was like she'd handed everybody permission. A couple of kids came tearing out of the temple lane, buckets sloshing over the sides. An old man who'd been sitting on a plastic stool in the shade lifted a cup and flicked water at my ankles, grinning with about 4 teeth left. And then Malie's grandson, couldn't have been more than 9, came charging straight at me with a bucket almost as big as he was, laughing so hard he could barely aim it. You know that feeling when you brace for something and it just doesn't come? Hold on to that, because that's the whole thing right there. I'd walked out that gate expecting a wall of strangers and a fight to survive. What I got was a street full of people quietly folding me in. Somebody dabbed a cool smear of white chalk paste on my cheek. A stranger's hand, I didn't even catch whose. That's a Songkran thing too. The chalk, a soft white paste they mark you with. And I promise you, it doesn't feel like being a target. It feels like the opposite. Like somebody reached over and said, "All right, you're one of us now. Hold still a second." And that's when the little 20-baht water gun finally came up. I'd bought it that morning off a rack outside the market, this cheap green thing, 20 baht. And I'd carried it out the door like a prop I never planned to fire. Held it the way you hold something you're pretty sure you won't use. Well, Malie's grandson soaked me clean through, top to bottom, and something in me just let go. I pumped that silly little gun and got him right back, square in the chest, and he shrieked and ran. And I laughed harder than I'd laughed in longer than I can tell you. 66 years old, standing in the road, firing a 20-baht toy at a kid I'd never met. A Songtheu came rattling up Songkwai Road right about then, one of those little pickup taxis with the bench seats in the back, and the whole bed of it was packed with people flinging water, trailing a sheet of it clean across the street like a wave breaking. Somewhere off behind us, over the river Kwai, the temple bells were going, low and steady under all the shouting. And Malie soaked herself by now. Her umbrella, long forgotten, pressed a warm plate of sticky rice off her own stall into my free hand. Didn't ask if I was hungry. Just put it there, like I'd been eating at her table for 10 years. And that's where it happened. The thing I still can't set down in plain words. Somewhere between that third bucket going down my back and that plate of sticky rice warm in my hand, something moved in me that had nothing to do with getting wet. And I want to be honest with you, I couldn't have named it standing there. It wasn't the water. It wasn't even the kindness, exactly. It was something underneath all of it. Quiet, turning over, slow, like a key finding a lock in the dark. I was soaked to the bone by then. Chalk drying stiff on my cheek, that empty 20-baht gun just hanging off my hand, and then somebody stepped up behind me. A grandmother, a stranger, tiny gray hair pinned back, a whole bucket in her arms, and she tipped it slow down my back, the cold running all the way to my heels. Then she leaned in close to my ear, and she called me one single word. One word I never, in 4 years on this side of the world, expected anybody here to call me lung. Uncle. That's the word she gave me, a woman I'd never laid eyes on, water still dripping off her wrists, saying it into my ear like it was the plainest thing in the world. You have to understand what that word carries out here. Farang. That's what a foreigner is. For years, sometimes forever. It isn't unkind. It just means you're from somewhere else, and everybody knows it. Sir is the polite version the little wall folks put up when they're being careful with you. But lung is what a kid calls the uncle who sneaks him 10 baht at a festival. It's the family word, the easy one. You don't hand it to a stranger by accident. And there I was, 66 years old, soaked clean through, chalk paste drying on both cheeks, the empty 20-baht water gun hanging off one finger, the same silly little thing I'd bought that morning and never planned to use. And this grandmother wrings a whole bucket slow down my back and calls me uncle, family. I'm not too proud to tell you my throat went tight, because for 4 years, I'd been a guest. A happy one, don't get me wrong, but a guest. There's a pane of glass between you and a place when you're the new one. You watch the life. You smile at it. You don't quite live inside it. 3 Songkrans I'd spent behind my own gate with the latch down, telling myself I was being sensible about the wet roads and the 40 degrees, waiting for it to be over. And here's the part nobody warned me about. Not the visa people, not the guidebooks, not one single expat over a cold beer. Nobody ever said, some plain wet afternoon, in a quiet town on the River Kwai, a woman you've never met is going to tip a bucket down your spine, call you uncle, and the glass is just gone. You're not watching Thailand anymore. You're standing in the middle of it, dripping, and it's yours. If you've spent one winter too many staring out a gray window, wondering if you'd ever really fit in somewhere new, this next part is for you. Because that's the thing that shifted right there in the street. And it had nothing to do with getting wet. I belonged. Not on paper. Not because a form said I could stay. I belonged the way you belong when the grandmother down the lane decides you're family and doesn't ask anybody's permission. Let me lay the pieces out one last time. Plain, the way I've been telling it. 4 years since I left the States. One cheap 20-baht water gun, bought that morning as a prop, finally emptied into the laughing chaos of Songkran Road. And 40 degrees of April heat, the same heat I'd feared for 3 Songkrans running, the heat I'd hidden from behind that gate. That afternoon, I blessed it. I stood right out in it, and I was grateful for every sweating minute. Funny how that works. The heat I ran from turned out to be the day I arrived. The water fight I dreaded turned out to be the blessing that let me in. Malie's little silver bowl of jasmine water, that first cool trickle over my shoulder, that was never a battle at all. It was a door, and it opened the second I stopped bracing and just let the water come. Kids from the temple lane were still circling me with their buckets, howling. An old fellow on his plastic stool lifted his cup my way. Somewhere across the water, a temple bell rang out over the river, and the Songthae rattled past, trailing a silver rope of spray. And I stood there in the thick of it, grinning like a fool, More at home on that street than I'd felt anywhere in a long, long time. So let me turn this around and talk to you now. You at the kitchen table, coffee going cold, wondering the quiet thing you don't say out loud. Can a man my age, our age, ever really stop being an outsider over there? Can you move halfway around the world and truly belong? Or do you just visit for the rest of your life? I carried that same worry for 4 years. So let me ask you straight, the way I'd ask a friend across the table. What's really standing between you and an afternoon like this one? Because I'll tell you what it isn't. It isn't the paperwork. I filled out every form. I kept the bank balance for the retirement visa. I did my 90-day reports. I stood in the lines. And all that paper is worth doing. It's what lets you stay. But not one page of it ever made me belong. 4 years of stamps and signatures couldn't do what a bowl of jasmine water and one small word did in about 4 seconds. That's the whole secret, and it's almost too simple to believe. Belonging out here isn't something you buy or file for. You can't earn it with a fat bank account or the perfect apartment. It just arrives. On an ordinary day, in a small town you can barely find on the map. When somebody decides you're one of theirs and calls you uncle, I'm still dripping as I tell you this. Chalk's still on my face. And I'm grinning because I know something now I wish somebody had told me 4 years ago, back when I was the nervous one behind the gate. The door in was never the visa. It was never the money. It was a woman named Malie. A small bowl of water that smelled like jasmine. And a single word, lung. And here's the part I really want you to hear, friend. That afternoon isn't some rare miracle that only lands on lucky old fools like me. It's waiting in 100 small towns up and down this country on the next Songkran, on an ordinary Tuesday at the noodle stall. It's real, it's warm, and it is so much closer than you think.